Hey everybody! Today I am talking about Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. So, this is the light book. The silly book. The one that's definitely for kids, right? We've got Hagrid. He's described as having hands the size of trash can lids and his feet and their leather boots were like baby dolphins. That is not how people are described in like book 6. But in book 1, everything is hyperbolic and fantastical. It's all got a real Roald Dahl feel to it. And I think that disguises the trauma of this book, which is what I'm going to be talking about today. Surprise! So, let's start with the obvious one, Harry. So, his parents have been violently murdered, and he's left on a doorstep in late October. It's quite cold, first of all. Secondly, side note, he's 15 months old, and 15-month-olds can walk. They can wander off into little whinging, and nobody stays to make sure that he doesn't do that. Just ring the doorbell, Dumbledore. Anyway, so he's found, and he's raised in a household that is abusive in a way that, honestly, I actually find a little bit improbable, because his aunt and uncle are so obsessed with what everybody thinks. They want to be thought of as normal. They want to be thought of, the kind of nouveau rich. But they allow their nephew to be conspicuously malnourished and neglected. But they're actually, I guess they're right, because nobody notices or nobody cares. Literally nobody does anything. They've got the school, the neighbors, Dudley's friends have parents, even Mrs. Fig, who we later find out is supposed to be sort of like keeping an eye on Harry for the magical world, either doesn't see this as a problem or reports it to Dumbledore, and Dumbledore's like, it's not that bad. But nobody does anything. And so he has this horrific childhood. And I do think that Rowling gives space to that. We see that trauma and we see glimpses of the effects that it has on Harry throughout the series. But then there's also all this other trauma in his book. Like, take Dudley. So Dudley is a bully. But, on the other hand, this adult does magic on him, painfully inflicting a pig's tail on him that he has to have surgically removed, which is humiliating and painful. And the last line of this book is Harry laughing at how he's going to mess with Dudley, because Dudley's now terrified of magic following that trauma. He says, "They don't know I'm not allowed to use magic at home. I'm going to have a lot of fun with Dudley this summer." That's kind of messed up, because Dudley is still like 11 or 12 years old, and he's been, kind of violated in this way. And then there are 2 other characters at Hogwarts whose trauma really stand out to me. One is Hermione and one is Neville. And actually what stands out to me is how quickly we move on from their trauma. So Hermione, on Halloween, she's crying in the bathroom because it's 2 months into school, and she still doesn't have any friends. She's this know-it-all girl, and even the narration, which follows kind of Harry's point of view, consistently describes her in these really unlikable terms. So she's in the bathroom. This killer mountain troll comes in, and she thinks she's going to die. She is cowering against the wall. The troll's coming closer and closer and closer, and smashing each sink as it goes. And maybe for British kids reading this, it's different. I read this the year after Columbine. It had come out the year before, and it reminded me of kids hiding in closets, kids hiding in cafeterias. I read it again this time, and I thought about the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando, where so many people were hiding in the bathrooms, just kind of waiting to die. And so after that scene, there's all these callbacks throughout the book to this mountain troll incident, but they're all really brief, and none of them ever touch on how Hermione might have felt. And it's hard to imagine an 11-year-old narrowly surviving a school shooting and being asked to just kind of shrug it off, like it's no big deal, but that's kind of what happens here. Nobody checks in with Hermione. There's no mental health care at all at Hogwarts. We don't see her reaction to the troll at the end of the book. We don't hear about how this troll in the bathroom incident affected her. And that's when I started to think about how commonplace this kind of thing is at Hogwarts, that this traumatizing incident can just be a plot device to make them all friends, and there's no lasting consequences on any of these kids, because that kind of thing happens all the time at Hogwarts. Because Hogwarts is really dangerous, and not just because of Voldemort and Quirrell and Fluffy and Norbert. It's basically dangerous at baseline. So, to take Neville, for example. The first weeks at Hogwarts, he is physically and verbally bullied by both students and teachers, and he starts by suffering chemical burns in potions class. Like, where is the eye wash and the emergency shower? Why are they not wearing protective equipment like goggles and lab coats? No, he's just like burned himself with this cauldron. Then he goes to flying class and he falls 20 feet from a broom and breaks his wrist. Later in his year, he's sent into the Forbidden Forest for detention. We know that Forbidden Forest is very dangerous because they keep saying it's very dangerous, but why not? Midnight detention for Neville and the other kids. And I know that this is salient right now because we're all thinking about what makes the school safe. But honestly, whenever I read this, I just think Hogwarts is a safety nightmare. And it makes me think about the kind of conversations that must happen when a Muggle-born student gets their letter. So we find out later that when that happens, someone from Hogwarts goes to tell the parents. And I sort of imagine it like say it's McGonagall, right? She's like, "Hi, Grangers, guess what? Hermione is a witch." And first of all, they're like, that's not real. So McGonagall, like, turned something into a pig, and they're like, okay, so witch is real. So McGonagall's then like, okay, so the thing about the wizarding world is we only have boarding schools. So I'm gonna need you to sign off on Hermione coming with me, your new magical witch friend, to our magical boarding school. So if the Grangers are still with us at this point, they're gonna ask, is that safe? Which is a totally reasonable question. I have children, and if they were being asked about some magical boarding school, I'd have questions. And in this book, we're constantly being told that Hogwarts is safe. It's the safest place to hide something. It was the safest place to be during Voldemort's reign of terror, because Dumbledore is there. But the honest answer to that question has got to be hell no. Like, Hogwarts is super dangerous. It's dangerous, and traumatizing stuff is always going down at Hogwarts. And it's so mundane that the text, like, hardly lingers on it. Like, people usually don't die playing Quidditch. You probably won't be killed in the Forbidden Forest if you have this dog. You know, the heavy-drinking gameskeeper will bring only, like, 1 or 2 out-of-control pets to Hogwarts this year. So my question is, why would these Muggle parents agree to let their kids go to Hogwarts? Like, with that kind of record, if I were Hermione's parents, I'd be like, no thanks. Hermione is in a really good girls in STEM program at our local secondary school where they have goggles and lab coats, and she's going to Cambridge. She's not going to Hogwarts with you. But they don't. They say, okay, yep, they're so proud, off you go. So I see 3 possible explanations for this. So one is that the Hogwarts representative lies, says, yep, Hogwarts, super safe. But I'm not actually sure how many parents would go for that, to be honest. Second is that they do some kind of light mind control on the parents. So we know that the good guys in the Harry Potter books are against the use of the Imperious Curse, which allows you to control other people. But they are cool with wiping Muggles' memories to preserve the secrecy of the wizarding world. So I'm not really sure where this would fall, but I think probably on the wrong side of that line. So the last option, that I actually think is the most interesting, is that the Hogwarts representative tells the truth. They say, yes, Hogwarts is super dangerous, but the truth would have to be that it's less dangerous than an untrained witch or wizard. So if we think about an analogous sort of superhero media, it's almost always the person who's unaware of their powers, who ends up causing the apocalypse, or blowing stuff up, hurting people. So maybe that's what the Hogwarts say. Hogwarts representatives say, yes, we agree, Hogwarts, very dangerous, but, if we leave your kid here, they're gonna blow up your house. But I think implicit in that is the admission that it's always dangerous to be a witch or wizard, no matter where you are. The wizarding world is dangerous at all times, which is why the dangers of Hogwarts often go uncommented on. It's just this constant background noise of stress and danger. So, if that's true, if the wizarding world is so dangerous that we don't even notice the dangers of Hogwarts, and parents are like, well, yeah, that's just how things are, then what that brings me to, finally, is this. In the real world, there's a ton of research about how humans have this instinct to reject others who aren't like us, to stick to our groups and distrust people who aren't part of them. And most of us move past that, but we actually do so with a fair amount of mental effort. And if we do it enough, we stop noticing that effort. But when we're stressed or we feel under threat, that instinct comes at us stronger because we don't have as much mental energy to kind of push past it. And psychologists have actually done a ton of experiments on this. So they'll do something to manipulate the subjects to make them more stressed. Like maybe in the waiting room, they'll put on the news and it'll just be like a whole bunch of really stressful disaster news. And then like the control group, they'll play calming music. And then they get the participants in there and they'll ask them questions about their sort of like warmth and openness to immigrants or queer people. And the more that the background hum of danger and stress sort of gets turned up, the more the participants reject people who are unlike themselves. So as we move into the next book, so we start to see the way that this magical society is organized, both internally, which sort of magical beings they do or do not think of as being like themselves or worthy of respect, worthy of freedom, and how they organize themselves in opposition to Muggle society. I want to keep thinking about that layer of fear and trauma that permeates everything and everyone in the magical world and what that does. And then finally, if I could offer something for us in this real world right now, which is pretty stressful, is to remember to keep an eye on our own stress and on our own fear and not let it hum so loudly that we retreat to that kind of position where we think that the only people who matter are people like us. So, I don't think that was the intended takeaway of this book, but I am really eager to see what you all have all been thinking about as you read this. And I'm excited to talk with you all about it on Thursday. All right, see y'all later.